I work for an organisation called the Coalition for Marriage, which I think Callum mentioned is the UK's largest pro-marriage organisation. We represent tens of thousands of individuals just like you, up and down the UK, who believe that marriage is the thing which only one man and one woman can do. Now that doesn't mean, is that a good thing? Yeah, okay, good, you're getting this is good. That doesn't mean other things don't exist in our society. You've just got to open your eyes and look around you. Other things do exist. And it doesn't mean that, so single parent, I come from a single parent background. I'm telling Calvin about this earlier on, not what you'd call a happy family background. And it doesn't mean that that's invalid or bad or anything else like that, but actually, the best version of the next generation is brought about by children growing up with their biological mum and dad. And the evidence is very, very clear. Now, I was thinking about what I would talk to you about this evening. And I thought, as I was sitting there next to Calvin, there's a friend of mine who came round to visit me last week, just over a week ago, in fact. A 70-year-old man who's a very good friend, and we're very honest and frank with each other. And he said to me, Tony, this Coalition for Marriage thing. I said, oh yeah, I really couldn't care less about it. Why should I care about it? And I said, well, that's very interesting, Brian. In the interest of honesty, I hope you choke on your eggs. But, he'd come round for lunch, and he was very honest. And what I thought I would do with you is share with him some of the thoughts. Because he said, why should I care? Why should I care what you think? Why should I care about marriage and what's happening to marriage? And what does it really matter to somebody like me? What does it really matter at all, in fact? People can just do what they want to do, can't they? None of it really matters. And as he said that, he asked me if I would pass him the salt, which is quite ironic, because one of my examples is around salt. And I said, Brian, here's the salt. But how would you feel, Brian, if somebody said, let's redefine salt, shall we? So it's no longer sodium and what is it, Calvin? Yeah, I was testing the teacher. So, sorry, you were IT, not, okay. So sodium and chlorine, yeah. So the idea is you've got these two atoms bonding together in a molecule, sodium and chlorine, and they have a special effect. They add flavor, they reduce the rate of decay, and they often act as a fertilizer. And the fact that that's the case isn't phobic to any other chemical or compound or any other atom. It just is what it is. But if we were to say, look, actually the other atoms are feeling a bit bad and the other chemical compounds are feeling a bit bad, and some of them that look a bit like salt want to be redefined as salt. Maybe sugar, maybe baby powder, maybe heroin. How would you feel, Brian, then? What do you think the future effects on society would be if all of a sudden we redefined salt to include things that look a bit like salt so they don't feel bad? Well, effectively, that's what we've done. And it has a few effects because it undermines the very nature of marriage. And why should that matter? Well, if you look at all the research, and as soon as I mention the word research, you have to put massive caveats around that word, because you can pick a study to prove anything. Yep. You can find a little study somewhere that will support any theory you've got. That's why whenever you're looking at research, you include things like very, very large studies of lots and lots of people. So it's very general and broad. You include things like good research methodologies, which take out bias and make sure that you've not just got people's opinions, you've got hard fact inside the research results. And when you do that, what you find is that growing up with your married mum and dad brings about extraordinary benefits. It brings about benefits, first of all, to marriage to men and women in terms of their health outcomes, in terms of their mental health outcomes, in terms of their wealth, in terms of their happiness. Men are markedly more happy when they're married. Husbands, look at your wives. She will tell you you are happier, but statistically you are too. Children do remarkably better off. Better off in terms of education, better off in terms of health and mental health, better off in terms of their propensity to earn more, better off in terms of their decreased likelihood to be involved in the criminal justice system, decreased likelihood to have early pregnancies in teenage years, etc., etc. And these aren't small benefits, they are significant benefits. And we've got some sheets which I want to, they're on the table out the front. There's one sheet here with some research studies if you want. There's another booklet here with, again, some research in it. And there's more on our website and more on our videos. Now, I regularly talk to people about these things. And it's really important that you back it up with research, even though today nobody cares about research. But the fact is, and this is why we're very keen on promoting man-woman marriage as the definition of marriage, is because it has remarkable benefits for society. And as soon as you undermine that and you change it, as it has been changed, into effectively who likes who, because that's exactly what we've done. We've removed the concept of childbearing as a fundamental part of marriage. We've taken sex out of the issue. And marriage is now, there's no conjugal act for same-sex marriage. Marriage is now a question of who likes who. And that raises the very interesting question of why would a government want to involve itself in legislating and codifying who likes who? It's a pointless exercise. You don't want your government involved in that sort of stuff. Many would say you don't want your government involved in human relationships at all. But at least maybe there's a good reason if you can say, well, look, we want to make sure that people stay together and encourage them and help them and give them all sorts of reasons to stay together for the sake of the children. Maybe you can justify that as a good idea. But who likes who doesn't make any sense at all, I said to Brian, and he quite agreed. But there's more. As soon as you take the essential nature of a woman out of marriage, you're doing something very, very strange. Because we know women are special. Those of you who are Christians here today, there's been several allusions to Christians here today. You know that when God created things, he created them in a specific order, so they became more and more important as he was doing so. And what was his final creation? Woman. Yeah, now, very good, because a lot of people say man. Kind of was, but then it was woman. Yeah? And we know that a bond between a mother and her child is very, very special. And we also know that parents have a right to, or married couples have a right to parenthood. Now, as soon as you take those two things, you say, right, married couples have a right to parenthood, two men can get married, so two men have a right to parenthood. What does that do to children? What does that do to the idea that you can now intentionally create children for cash with the intentional desire to separate them from either their biological mum or biological dad or otherwise? You turn children into commodities, into trinkets, and you move from a society which should be organized around the things that help children grow in the best way possible, and you turn it into a society which actually commoditizes children. And that's an awfully terrible, slippery slope. And not only that, but what happens then is that you have to teach these ideologies, or people want to teach these ideologies once they're accepted in society, in wider areas. For example, schools. We've had that mentioned tonight. Yet we know there's research by lots of people. I've spoken to a chap called David Payton, who Lucy's spoken to too. There's a video with him on our site. And he's an industrial economist at Nottingham University. And he's quite clear, the more you teach children about sex, the more sex they will have. The more you teach children about different types of sex, the more different types of sex they will have. Yet we seem to have this inexorable pressure to teach more and more sex. And we've removed any concept of good or bad or right or wrong from the conversation, and we've replaced it with consent. This notion of the only thing that's important is consent. Now, we know that kids that we're teaching this to are too young to consent, which makes you wonder why on earth we're going down this line. And everyone knows Even the people who are doing this and propagating it in policies, they know the more you teach kids about sex, the more sex will be had. Abortion rates have skyrocketed. Sexually transmitted diseases among teens have skyrocketed. It's been in the news again recently. Why don't we try the abstinence thing? Why don't we try that for a while as an experiment and see if that actually has an effect instead of teaching ever more sex? Well, it's an interesting question, that, isn't it? And then what we end up doing is we end up commercializing that teaching. So now we've got these ideas of, well, actually anything goes, love is love, born this way, phrases we might come across again later on in the conversation. Once you get those, it leads to all sorts of things. Today it happens to be trans and the trans epidemic, which we're commercializing. Now, back in the day, rebellious teenagers do things. They might have been goths or punks back in the day. And we would commercialize that by, I don't know, black nail varnish, studded leather belts, leather jackets. I'm not reflecting on my history at all. But all those sorts of things might have been commercialized. Today, we're commercializing it with puberty blockers and genital surgery. And it's absolutely terrible that we're doing this, as we've said over and over again. And this is stuff you've heard before. But one thing we need to realize and recognize as individuals, these are political issues. Yeah, with a small p, but they're political issues. Parents have an absolute right to speak up on these issues. The problem is they're becoming the latest form of blasphemy, aren't they? And it's almost like, I daren't say anything. I daren't speak up. I daren't say what I feel to say. But actually, parents have every right to be able to say, I do not want my child taught anything around the fact that you can have sexual desires inconsistent with your biology. My little children need not learn anything about that. And that should be a parent's right. And let me just make it clear, because, yeah, absolutely, any kind of medicalization of trans for children should be illegal immediately. It should go and be banned. But there's more than that. The idea that, well, there's something special about trans which ban the trans but gay's okay. Well, let's think about that for a minute. And you've got to treat this with the utmost carefulness and sincerity of heart and mercy, because a lot of us know people stuck in these situations. A lot of us know parents stuck and dealing with these situations on a daily basis. And it's hard. And the problem we've got is, I suppose it comes from the fact that we should be teaching kids, ideally, young kids, the things which, if everyone did, would lead to a more prosperous society, a better, healthier, wealthier society. Not the things which, if everyone did, would lead to the end of humanity. Yep? That doesn't mean you don't respect people. You know, if I can use the analogy, I struggle with my weight. It's up and down all the time. And I'm at a low point now, which is quite nice. Low point in terms of weight as opposed to, anything else. And that's quite good. But, sometimes I weigh a lot more. And it goes up and down, and as things do. You wouldn't ever teach in school that it's good to be overweight, would you? You wouldn't do it, because it's patently actually not good. And, the evidence, the biological evidence around some of the things we're teaching in schools is patently, physiologically not good. The results are not good for individuals and more widely. So we need to be very careful what we're teaching our children. The problem we've got, of course, is that the schools are increasingly being filled with activist teachers, activist heads. They're bringing in organizations from outside, as Calvin has referred to, with Claire Page and others. And people are too scared to say anything. There's an issue at home at the moment, which some parents are thinking of writing into the school about. It's really difficult to get parents to join in as well, because they're scared. Some have been open and said, well, I've got another child I want to get into the school. I don't want to make a fuss. I have the privilege of going up and down the UK and speaking to thousands of people like yourself. And people are scared. It has a chilling effect. The whole cancel culture is worrying. It's scary. And not only that, if you look at the MPs, you've got one or two exceptions, like Miriam Cates, who's willing to stand up and actually call some of this stuff out on an evidence base and say we shouldn't be doing this. And she's fighting a good battle there. But they're the exception. October 2018, an organization called Comres undertook an anonymous survey of MPs in Westminster. And of those who responded, over half said they were too scared to say what they really felt around LGBT issues. Our lawmakers are too scared to say what they feel, and presumably too scared to vote as they should do. Well, let's look to the churches then, shall we? Oh. Exactly. There's not much hope there. So my first message to you guys in this room is we are the people we've been waiting for. No one else is coming. And this is the absolute fundamental message we need to start taking on board. We are the people we've been waiting for. Up and down the country, no one else is coming. It really is down to us. And there's an urgency for us to act. If you look around what's happening in society, there is a pandemic of pornography, an absolute pandemic of pornography. And you wonder why the government has recently put a lot of effort into making sure children can't access gambling sites. Yep, put effort in, it's sorted it out. The large majority of gambling sites are now inaccessible to kids. They have to go through some kind of registration process, etc. The good ones can still do it, but it's hard. Why can't they do the same with pornography? Why won't they do the same with pornography? I know they're looking at a much larger online harms bill, but that's a massive task which will take a long time. They could and should be sorting out pornography. Not only that, but we've got a massive demographic problem around the corner. Our replacement rate in the UK, in terms of average numbers of children by 2 people, is about 1.7. And it's been around that level for about 50 years now. And that has a significant impact on the culture. And it's not just the UK. It's much wider than that. And it's an absolutely huge pending problem. If you look online, there's a video just been released called Birth Gap, which starts going into these things and exactly the problems that are facing us down the line if we don't do something. And that's tied in, of course, with the reduction in the number of marriages. People are generally speaking marrying less, and they're generally speaking marrying later in life. So closing down that fertility window to be able to have children. Hence the 1.7 replacement rate, and the fact that, yes, our population is growing, but it's not with people who are born in the country. We're having to bring people over to fill things up again. Yeah? And that has other implications, which is not the purview of C4M, but that has other implications. And it's a wider problem. And I interviewed a guy called Mark Regnerus, who's written a book which looks at this issue, that marriage has fallen from being a cornerstone on which you build your life together to a capstone, something you do at the end once you feel you've got your career sorted out, etc., etc. And how do we change that thing? And the big thing to realize about this is that the people who are affected most about these issues are the less well-off in society. Because although marriage rates are falling, if you look at the demographic spread, the better well-off are marrying in ever-increasing numbers. They're doing very well. They're taking advantage of marriage. The people who are spouting the rhetoric are marrying and enjoying marriage. The people who aren't, in ever greater numbers, are the less well-off. The people who could really do with the benefits and the security that marriage gives, we penalize them and say, if you move in with the father of your children, you will lose your benefits. And we actively discourage marriage. What on earth are we doing? There's a guy an Oxford anthropologist back from the 1930s called J.D. Unwin. Anybody heard of him? Well, yeah, he wrote a book called Sex and Culture. And the book was his analysis of over 80 cultures throughout time. And he had done this study. And his simple question, he wasn't a Christian, he wasn't anything, he was just an academic. And his simple question was, well, I wonder what things make cultures flourish and what things lead to a culture's demise. So it just fades out and becomes non-existent. And he found three things which, when they were present, a culture would grow and flourish. And once they disappeared, a culture had about 100 years left before it would cease to exist. Those three things were premarital chastity, yep, not having sex until you're married. Postmarital monogamy, sticking with one partner. Long-term relationships. And the third thing was the worship of a deity. Now, depending on the culture he looked at, they used different words for God, they used different words for marriage, but those three factors were key. As soon as those things went from a culture, the culture had about 100 years left. And looking at Unwin's plan, we're about 70 years through that 100 years. So according to him, we're on the way out. We're on the way out. But we're not there yet. So it's back to, we are the people we've been waiting for. So as I draw to a conclusion, what can we do? What on earth can we do? Well, I think there's quite a lot, actually. First of all, we can encourage our young people to get married young, to have lots of kids, and to stay married. Yep? It's a good thing to do. If you're a minister, there's one or two ministers here today, encourage your young people to get married. Encourage them to stay married. Put things in place to help people who are married to have the best marriages possible. Those of you who are here today, do you care for your marriage? Do you look after your marriage? Do you make sure it's the best marriage you can have? So your kids look at you and think, actually, I want what mum and dad have. I want that kind of love and that kind of relationship. That's what I want in my life too, because actually they're really happy. They've worked it out, and I can see that, and I want some of that too. And then a third thing we can do, there's an interesting book by a lady called Kimberly Ells called The Invincible Family. And I interviewed Kimberly recently as well. But she spoke about how communism fell in Hungary. And she said it was really interesting because, of course, they were in a situation where you dare not speak out against the state. And the state was indoctrinating the children. But what they would do systematically as a society is once their children were old enough to be trusted, every night they would take their children down to the cellar and they would find out what they'd learned in the state school that day, and they would wash it off them, and they would teach them properly every single night. And slowly but surely, communism fell through that one action. And it's picking up on things other people have said that we should be doing. Get involved in your kids' education. Find out actively what they're learning. And that means you need a good relationship with your children, by the way. Get involved in what they're doing. And every night, wash it off and teach them good things instead. And that's a really good way of combating. Another thing we need to do is stand firm. It's really hard in the face of cancel culture. When you see what happens to people around you who stand for what they believe in, it brings about what you call a chilling effect. People are scared to speak up themselves. But I would encourage you to stand firm, calmly, gracefully. Marshal your facts. Pick up some information sheets. Come and speak to me. Come and speak to other people. Marshal your facts and be ready to calmly and gracefully stand firm for what you believe in. Practically speaking, we should write. We should write to MPs. We should write to newspapers. We should take part in campaigns objecting to this, that, and the other. And I often get people saying, look, there's just no point. I know my MP. It means nothing to my MP. Well, one of the greatest forces of nature is an avalanche. Avalanches are made up of tiny snowflakes. Yep. And snowflakes often a misused expression in our society today. I'm not saying you should be snowflakes, but I'm saying that writing a letter is like a little snowflake. The more we do it, the more people do it, it turns into an avalanche, and it will. So do that. It's not very expensive personally. You can do that. You can share your opinion. Just keep doing that. Write to whoever you can. Put aside, I don't know, half an hour on a Saturday morning once a month, something as little as that, to say, I'll write a letter to an MP, I'll do something, I'll complain about a BBC program, I'll do something. Do that. And then the other thing you can do is uphold individuals and organizations who are taking a stand for you, or, if you like, for themselves, but a stand that you can support. So we've mentioned Claire Page. There are many others. There's a group of Welsh ladies, fearsome Welsh ladies in Wales, who are taking the government to court. And they've lost once, and they've just lost again. They don't care. They're going to raise funds, and they're going to do it again. You don't mess with Welsh women, it turns out, right? So, but again, you know, I'll find out their crowdfunder, I'll support it, I'll forward it on, other people will support it, you know, and they eventually hope to win, yeah? Because similar to other administrations in Wales, we're teaching kids all sorts of things from a very young age, and the right to withdraw has been removed in Wales. So the state is saying, we will teach your kids whatever we want. 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes. I suppose the last thing I would say, right, is that it's been mentioned that maybe you should be a school governor, but maybe we should do even more than that if we can. I'm very conscious that in my constituency of Cardiff North, there are between 11 and 13 people who decide who goes on the list out to be voted on, yeah, by the larger party and then out for election. 11 to 13 people. I know of maybe 5,000 Christians in Cardiff. Can we not find 11 to 13 people to get involved and turn up? Can we not find people to be school governors? Can we not find people to get involved with local health boards and other sorts of organizations? And from the ground up to start changing things. That's the difference we make. But I want to leave you with some good news. Back to Kimberly L's book. She finishes with this lovely point. The family is invincible. No matter what the struggle is, family will survive. It's in us all. We all desire, most of us desire, to find a partner, to procreate, and to form a family. Families are tough, families are resilient, families are self-sufficient, families will survive. But the time frame in which that happens is largely due to us. Please pick up some literature. Please come and talk to me before you go. Do not leave the building without a business card. And I can sense I'm being shut up now, so I'll hand back to Callum.
For giving this presentation to us, and again we'll allow 5 minutes for questions, and again please try not to give a statement, please just ask a question and we'll give Tony an opportunity to answer. So if you have a question, if you would raise your hand. So lady here, the microphone is coming to you.
Hello. Oh, you keep saying about families matter. But, you know, we're living in a generation now. Everything is so high. You know, to run a family, you know, the cost of living. So a lot of people are now thinking of not having family. So how do we accommodate that? You know, we're limiting ourselves to one child or two.
Yeah. It's a good question. A lot of people aren't bothering to marry without realizing that marrying actually statistically helps you to be better off together. You share costs. You share all sorts of things, which is a great reason to get married. And that enables you to spend money on a family. And actually, yeah, sometimes you have to cut your cloth to fit. You know, I know a young couple who say, oh, we can't afford children yet. They both drive nice cars. They both have foreign holidays at least twice a year. You know, well, you could if you wanted to. And also, there's nothing more joyful than having your own kids. And I know that's very hard for people who, for whatever reason, can't have kids. And I accept that. And I know some people in that situation who've adopted, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, I just think of my family background and having a family now, there is nothing more joyful than that. The kids and the family environment. It really is just a wonderful, fulfilling thing. And actually, it does mean you can't always have, you know, we don't do foreign holidays regularly because we can't afford them. But hey, we got other stuff instead.
Thank you. We have, oh yes, a question here.
Thank you so much for your talk. I go to a church that generally teaches, it has very good teaching, right? But I've sort of identified a problem within the Christian culture, specifically within the sort of student-focused churches, right? And it's that even though they generally do teach the full counsel of God, mostly, because they have such a particularly high view of the Great Commission, I believe that it's been elevated to a level that's actually above where God has placed it in some cases. And I was just wondering, so I've noticed that an incredible amount of people at my church are putting off marriage until say after they finish their degree, and they won't even consider dating, for example, until they've finished their degree. And also when people are getting married, they're then going absolutely years without having a single child. And the ministers aren't saying anything necessarily in a lot of these churches because they have, in my view, have placed an ungodly emphasis on the position of the Great Commission within the full counsel of God. And I was just wondering how do we change this identifiable problem? Specifically, okay, especially to do with the undue delay of marriage as well.
Okay, how do we address the undue delay of marriage, particularly in churches?
Thanks.
So broadly speaking, Stephen McCoy has got a good book, in his image, A Biblical Introduction to Social Ethics, which deals with some of these issues for pastors who frankly don't know what to say, yeah, because they're busy doing other stuff and they can't catch up with all the sorts of things. But I think, you know, the idea of, you know, if we've got a load of young people going out and doing the Great Commission, that's a wonderful thing. But the Great Commission involves also and teaching them everything I have taught you. And Christ was quite clear about the benefits of marriage. And actually doing that, the Great Commission together, is a wonderful thing. You know, why would that stop you from being married? You know, doing it as a team would be a great idea. But put your pastor in touch with us and we'll have a word.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think just time-wise, we will have to move on. If you have a question and you wanted to ask Tony,